All right, looks like we're up and running. So this will be discussion part 3, that is in the Astrotheology series, part 3 of the Celestial Code of Scripture by John McHugh is the current book I'm discussing. There was also an intro, so it's the 4th installment. And in this discussion, I'd like to cover chapter 8 of this book. But just briefly before I get to that, I wanted to update a few things from the last discussion. I think this is in frame. Hold on, let's double check. Yeah, it should be in frame. Yeah, okay, sorry about that. Just double checking. So in the last discussion covering chapter 7, I had drawn a similar diagram to this. This is actually, I basically copied my own work to center it on the page better and get rid of a few mistakes, because Aries was basically running off the page in that version. And then I added the whale. I know traditionally it's more of like a sea monster with the head up here, and added in Cygnus, the swan, or also the Northern Cross. Just a few more I just penciled in to get understanding of all the related constellations. And this actually, some of these same constellations do come up in chapter 8. Also, before I get to the new drawing, I just wanted to go over some of these books that I received. I had mentioned these in the previous discussion that I had ordered them. So they're not books on astrotheology, but they are books on star names and star lore. So this one, I had already had the digital, the ebook version. And so this is a mid-century reprint of a book from early 20th century. So I think it tells us in so this is the Dover edition, and it's from 1963, but it has some corrections of the work first published in 1899 under the title Star Names and Their Meanings. So basically they get a book that is probably going into public domain, and they make a few edits and corrections and they reprint it. And this is a similar work, Star Lore, Myths, Legends, and Facts. And I believe this has a similar message. Yeah, Dover edition. This particular one is from 2004, actually. But it was based on Star Lore of All Ages by the same author from 1911. So this is mid-century reprint of a book from 1899. And then this book, which actually has the other book in its references, is like a 21st century reprint of an early 20th century book. So they're not really outdated because they've been edited, but you can probably get the original versions because they would have gone into the public domain in the US, or I think probably a bunch of other countries too, but you'd have to check on that. I only know for here. But so the edited version would not clearly be in the public domain because they did make some changes. But anyway, this one, they have very similar information. Star names does focus on the names of the stars, and then it has entries under a constellation, paragraphs about each star. Whereas star lore is more constellation level. It does include star names, but it's more focused on presenting the overall lore. And I wondered if I could find an example, because yeah, this one has illustrations. The earlier one has no illustrations, so that's one reason I bought this. I bought them both used. I mean, they're from Amazon, but I believe they were used books. Because this one has the illustrations so you can understand like how it was envisioned. So those have been useful references. Okay, so getting to chapter 8, back to the Celestial Code of Scripture by John McHugh. Chapter 8 is Rediscovering Noah's Celestial Flood, and it does go over some flood myths in general. Am I getting too much shadows? I can change my light. I think it's probably okay, right? Yeah, because I'll move this aside. So it's already been, well, not 10 minutes, but it's already been a couple minutes. But I do want to say that for chapter 7, I think it took me around an hour and a half to get through all of chapter 7. So I want to try to get a better pace for this chapter. So I did work on some additional flashcards, and I also pre-prepared a drawing before the stream. Okay, so in this chapter, the flood, I'll just say up front, the arc of the flood story, we're going to see the constellation Argo be used, and we're going to see the Pegasus, the Great Square of Pegasus again. Similar to how in chapter 7 it was known as Field, Garden, and Ribcage. It's going to also be a boat of some kind, or a box or chest or boat of some kind. So the chapter starts off similar to how the last chapter did, with like giving a history of how people understood the story of Noah's flood. And yes, there was a time when people, because this story would have been included in both the Jewish and Christian Bibles, the Hebrew Bible and the Christian Old Testament. That there were people, and probably a few still today, that understood it as literal history. But then as like geology and other things advanced, people started to be like, oh, maybe there wasn't a literal worldwide flood. But there was also, people that were like, it kind of pendulum, paradigm shift, swing kind of thing, where there's people today that they could be atheist or agnostic, but they still propose, but there was the Ice Age, or there was collisions from, comets or whatever, and they'll still propose that there were literal floods. And of course, there are floods in the world, just like there's earthquakes and volcanoes and hurricanes. They can be real, but the way it's described in the myth, I'm going to say here, the particular way it's described, it's clearly metaphorical, mythic imagery. So what McHugh is saying is that, again, like in the rest of this work, that it has to do with this ancient wordplay. So I'm going to read an excerpt here, because one of the things McHugh talks about is when he came across the Sumerian king list, which is a specific document, probably a tablet. Okay, so I'm going to read an excerpt here. Talking about the Sumerian king list. The text goes on to list 8 antediluvian monarchs that ruled for 241,200 years. So it's 241,200 years before the flood. If placed within our modern concept of human evolution, these early antediluvian kings were ruling Sumeria before our species even existed. This was a time when the dominant hominids were the man-ape Homo erectus and our Neanderthal ancestors. And although the historic memory of each ruler had evaporated into the dim mist of time, it was the translation of their names that rang salient. First, A. Lulim, horn of the stag. Second, A. Lalgar, shore of the Apsu. Enmenluana, Lord Crown Man of the Sky. Fourth, Enmengalana, Lord Great Crown of the Sky. Fifth, Dingir Dumuzi, Deity Faithful Son. Sixth, Ensipaziana, Lord Faithful Shepherd of the Sky. Seventh, Enmendurana, Lord Crown Bound of the Sky. Eighth, Ubar Tutu, Vanquishing Divine Protection, ? So that intro paragraph has, I think, a few things that are like technically not accurate, because I think that Homo sapiens currently have been pushed back to around that time. So yeah, if it was like 200 something thousand years ago, I think there actually were Homo sapiens. They just weren't all over the earth yet. Then also, for whatever reason, it says that the dominant hominids at the time were Homo erectus and our Neanderthal ancestors. Well, Neanderthals we know now aren't our ancestors. It's more like, I don't know, a cousin or like it's another branch. It's a different species that coexisted. Well, in the sense that some people, like more likely those of European descent, can have some Neanderthal DNA in admixture, but they aren't directly the ancestors of Homo sapiens in general. So that was weird, because this is a recent book. So I just wanted to kind of bring that up, because that was like a little bit of a weird step away from the astrotheology and making, statements about anthropology that not that I'm an anthropologist, but I've seen some Gutsick Gibbon YouTube videos. Anyway, so yeah, the actual list of the king names, though, yeah, I can see how those would correspond to some constellations. So the author talks about that, looking for crowns and such, and how there's this specific line in the king list where it says, when the kingship was lowered from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. But then there's a different translation available that says, the flood swept. Okay, that was I'm sorry. It's not. I don't know if it's a separate translation, because I'm reading it from. One is a certain translation, but then there's another similar line, but it may be that this is from a different place in the document. It says, the flood swept thereover, after the flood had swept thereover, when the kingship was lowered from the heavens / skies, the kingship was in Kish. So there's a little bit of a different wording in that one, but it just mentions the flood, like just casually drops it in. But this document doesn't talk about, it doesn't explain it. So something that McHugh points out is that this king list is one of the earliest surviving documents that mentions there even being this big flood. And it's odd because later tales of the specific flood come after the king list that mentions it. That could, now I'm just thinking, that could just be that we don't have that evidence today, it didn't survive. Or it could be that the story developed after the concept. And I don't know, that could be. So in this chapter, the author McHugh is presenting how maybe this also has the wordplay with Sumerian logograms and Akkadian, and how some of that translates into Hebrew, for example. So initially, he doesn't really focus on the ark. There's a section, and I'll just briefly show one of the illustrations. This is by Elizabeth Hardy again. And it is kind of showing Argo over here, but what they're focusing on is that they're saying there's a figure here that represents the planet Saturn. And there's a whole section of, not a whole section, but there's a little section of the chapter that talks about why in the King's List and the different records that Saturn would be involved. Because as we talk, or let me put it this way, I'm going to kind of skip over the part that explains why Saturn was involved. Not because, it's presented well in the book, and I'm not saying that I disagree. It's just that for time constraints and wanting to get to the other information, I'm going to kind of skip that over, because I don't think in this particular sense it matters for my purposes to say if it was Saturn or not, because these constellations that we're going to discuss being at the along the ecliptic, any of the planets and the sun and the moon could interact with them, because that's what the ecliptic is. That's the path that from our perspective, they're all going to go along that invisible band in the sky. So I don't think it matters right now why it would be that particular planet and or associated deity. So in the actual so some of the wordplay is these words like Aga and Agu, and remember in the king list they mentioned the word crown several times. Well, I believe one of these puns is it gets from the crown to a boat. I'm trying to see. I read this before, but then sometimes when I get to actually say it in the stream, I kind of what was I going to say? Oh, okay, I remember now. I'm sorry. The word that they use for crown it sounds just like it's a homonym for, or not a homonym, a homophone for the word that means like a devastating flood. So he's saying, what if there's like a story about a crown, but then through these puns and like wordplay, it gets turned into a story about a flood. And I think that's the starting place. So then we get to the boat. So when they tell about one of the, and there's a date here, but I'm trying to see. Okay, I think they're talking about the Gilgamesh stories. They're talking about the one that's called Gilgamesh and Aga. And Aga was a king from a different land. And then I think there's also the Epic of Gilgamesh, in which Gilgamesh meets Utnapishtim. That's not specifically mentioned in this section, but I do recall reading that separately. And so the author is saying that the name for the boat, it uses this Ma-gur in Sumerian, or the Akkadian version of that is Makuru. And it doesn't just mean any boat. It specifically means a flood boat. So that we're talking about some kind of an ark. And then let me see if I have the Ma-gur here. Of course, there's so many of these now. Oh yeah, I did make them. Okay, so Ma-gur is the related Sumerian logograms for the flood boat. And then they're saying, but it can be read as an alternate reading, Ma-tum, instead of Ma-gur. But that version would mean ship's stern. So he's talking about how, is it the whole ship or is it the stern? Well, and I think I can show you on this other map. I'm reaching here, hold on. That as seen today from the northern hemisphere, you can't even barely see Argo at the horizon. Like this, this is where the sail is. Where's my pointer? I like using this shiny pencil as a pointer. This is the top of the sail, or like a surface of the sail. And then over here is like the stern or rear of the ship. So it's like at an angle, and it's barely visible above the horizon. So already that's making me think that depending on your, is it the latitude? Yeah. Your latitude, north or south, you would see more or less of this constellation, because it's, it's one of the ones that, for me being in the north, it's like too far south. But if you travel south, then you should see it, but then certain other stars would be less visible. So I've already drawn it and filled it in with marker just to make it like really visible. This is the full constellation. Or let me be more specific. This is H.A. Ray's version of the Argo constellation. And it does use the traditional stars in Argo that have since that time been split into multiple constellations, because Argo was so big a constellation, like the degrees that it took up in the sky was just like so much bigger than the others. So they divided it. So actually, like, this is one constellation, the compass is one constellation, the sail is a different constellation, the front here is a different, they're all, I think, like, the keel is a different, they're just all different constellations today. But it was, I'm sorry, I'm reaching for one of the books that's here. It was sometimes depicted only as the stern, but I'm just going to show briefly here that this is the version I got from, I'm flipping pages here, pardon, I think I just skipped it. Ah, here it is. Okay, so this is from H.A. Rey, The Stars, A New Way to See Them. And here's the page where they show Argo, or he shows Argo. And you can see how it's like they have the separate labels for the different parts. But it is a full ship. But many times, and I think that McHugh has on one of these pages an illustration. Oh, here it is. It's saying how this word aga can mean stern. And it's showing just the stern of the ship. There are depictions of Argo that look like this. And right now, even though I've been looking at some of these books, I'm not entirely sure if that's because the constellation doesn't have the bow of the ship at all, or if it's just a matter of not seeing it in the north so they don't think that it's there. I'm actually kind of fuzzy on that part. So that's something, I did look at it, but I'm not entirely sure. But either way, whether it's just we're saying that we only see this bit here, or if we see the whole constellation, for the purposes of the myth, it still is representing the flood boat. But although Argo, and I can I'll put the map back. Okay, so Argo is positioned in such a way that it appears to be traveling along the Milky Way. So I already talked about in the other parts how there was this concept of the sky is heaven, is the realm of the gods. But it's also a watery place. It's like a sea. It's like what some myths or some stories call the waters above. But within that, so all of this would be water in some sense. But separate from that, there's a concept of, is this side? Yeah. There's a concept of this side over here where we have the southern fish, Aquarius, the goatfish, Capricorn, the whale or sea monster, Pisces. This portion is also known as like the sea. Although the whole thing is a watery realm, this portion is also known as the sea. And within that, Eridanus is a constellation, is a constellation that represents a river. So there's a river inside of the sea. Plus, I'm messing up the part that I wanted to have this on. Plus, okay, so Argos, look over here. Plus, the Milky Way itself, depending on like the metaphor that the myths are using, the Milky Way also can be a river. So when we're talking about a flood, it can be difficult to interpret because what is flooding? We don't think it was necessarily an earthly flood, like the literal, and the oceans were like to the top of the mountain. No, we don't think that. But what is the actual story? What is metaphorically is it telling us? Was it just when we see the boat go below the horizon, it's like it's sinking, or maybe there's floodwaters are rising? Or is it something to do with the watery constellations, like a watery theme? Actually, just earlier today, I was watching some YouTube videos, and I'm trying to think of his name. There's another author that I want to talk about his work in the future. I believe his name is John Knight, spelled with a K, Lundwall. And if you search for him, he has videos on YouTube that are also about myth and cosmology. And he actually, it wasn't a video new today, I just happened to watch it today, was talking about flood myths in general, and how from his interpretation that it was a kind of an initiation, or like a rebirth, that like the story of the waters can be like symbolic of a rebirth or a recreation, or even just a creation story. And it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with a disaster, but of course we can also view it that way. So it's what is the interpretation that we think makes sense. Okay, so sorry. So it might make sense to have Argo be the flood boat, but then we get to, in specific flood stories, they give the dimensions of the ark that is to be built. And the problem here is that it basically is a cube. And I believe that the version from Genesis, maybe I think cubits is the unit they use, but in a version that right, and I'm gonna read this quote. This is from the Epic of Gilgamesh, which John McHugh is quoting within the Celestial Code of Scripture. And it says, "The boat that you are going to build, her dimensions should all correspond. Her breadth and length should be the same. Cover her with a roof like the Apsu." So it also gives measurements, and I think it's saying 1 iku. Is that the part that I'm at? Yeah, so then this is another quote. On the 5th day, On the 5th day, I set in place her surface. 1 field was her circumference, 10 rods, each her sides stood high. So he's saying that, well, if we remember, 1 field, we saw I'm going to find, it's this one, right? Yeah. Iku or Gan. This can be read Iku or Gan, I guess. This means 1 field. So remember from the last one, this square was also called Iku, the field. That was the name of the constellation. So if a certain culture like Sumeria or Sumer and Akkad or Babylon is saying in their myth that they made this vessel with like equal sides and then the measurement was one field, then it makes it be like, oh, you're looking for something that's a square the size of a field, which this is. It's in the sky. You know, so it's like the flood boat, you know, like, is it, you know, somehow it's both things. And I think we can look on here on this map again. Remember, this is Guide to the Stars, which I've been using. That we can just about get both the Pegasus Square and a little bit of Argo in the same horizon. So the very top, the very tip of Argo would be down here. So it's along the Milky Way. And I'm sorry, I'm not in frame for that one. The Pegasus Square here is close to the Milky Way, and it is above, you know, the fish and the water god. So it's kind of in that part that's considered the sea, although kind of far north. But it's still in that part that's considered the sea. So it is in a watery part of the sky, both of them. Can even imagine that you went from here to here, or, you know, this one went to here, or that there's some kind of travel on the Milky Way, perhaps, is maybe even what they're saying. Oh, okay, so just going over, we have like Ma and Gur together means the flood boat. In Akkadian is Makuru, I believe. So Ma can also have a meaning of a different type of vessel, like a box. So is it, you know, like a flood boat, a flood box? What, you know, I mean, I guess today we would call it the ark. It could, you know, but it's kind of like that's where the wordplay comes in, that it could be either one. So like, I'll just show quickly this illustration where they're showing like a boat shape and then a square shape. And it's like when the flood boat becomes one field, it makes sense that it's like the boat shape becomes, you know, the square. Yeah. They were all, oh, yeah, and Gur, I think, has an other reading as well. Oh, because it means flood, but with other, like, wordplay and readings, it kind of can indicate construct or perimeter. Yeah, so it's like construct a box is the same as flood boat. So I don't know, something like that. Oh, and then, so remember that this field is Iku. That's the reading, I guess, of it. But if we remember from last time, Iku, is it this one? Oh, yeah. Iku is You can go from Iku, the reading here, to Iku. And when you do that, it gives you other readings. So you get this concept of there being like a seed. And through wordplay with the sound similar sounding igu, not iku, you get the meaning of life. So it's like this idea of putting all the seeds or putting all the life into this boat or box is something that is in the myth stories, right? But then there's this section in the chapter that talks about, well, why in, I think, yeah, it's saying the Quran, it seems like the water comes from an oven. I actually do not know the Quran well enough to know if that's actually the translation that they say that, because it's still Noah. The Quran still has Noah as the character, but the actual waters are like come from an oven. There's also this whole like a section where the author John McHugh is talking about Salman al-Farsi, and I believe that's one of I believe that's what is called the companions, people that were the companions of the prophet. But I'm not sure exactly what the implication of this is, but I think what McHugh is suggesting is that because, Salman al-Farsi, al-Farsi just basically means he was a Persian. He's from Persia. And also, if we're talking about the Quran, remember, this is like 1,000 years, maybe after like the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible books were written. And it's maybe like, I don't know, 4 or 5, depending, because some of the books were written at different times, maybe like several hundred, years after the Christian New Testament was written. So it was different cultures around at that time. But I think what they're suggesting is that because in the previous chapter we talked about, or in the previous parts we talked about how McHugh has this idea that certain people knew how to read the cuneiform. So I think that what that was suggesting is that maybe one of the companions could have told the prophet about the constellation writing, the Lamashi, the constellation writing, or how, what, because I mean, the thing with the astrotheology is, like, it's not going to be the theological, well, in this particular case, it's not the theological interpretation that God, because I know some people have this interpretation, they say that, well, yes, the constellations do correspond to Bible stories, but that's because God put them there. God made all the stars and earth be in such and such positions so that we could see, right? So people say that today, because if we're talking about the ancients and they still had this different worldview or mental map or kind of like less literate culture, they wouldn't need to say that. It's like they had a belief that when you saw the sky, that was the heavens. But once you get to like a time period where there's like astronomy and stuff, like, I mean, like in the sense that we have today, and there's like satellites and stuff, then, you know, people landed on the moon. So then it becomes necessary to explain, if it's just space, why people believe stories that are, you know, why is astrotheology a thing? So then they'll say, oh, because God put the constellations there. That's not what I'm suggesting. And as I said in the other parts, I'm not endorsing any particular belief system, astrotheology or otherwise. I think it's very interesting. But this is like, this part with the oven, I'm trying to understand, because like the claim, right, is not that the prophet wrote the stories. It was given to him. That's the theological claim. So I think what McHugh is saying is that, oh, but maybe this companion kind of like helped with certain things, because why else would this wordplay be there? But I mean, people can always just say, because God put the meaning there when God wrote the story. But so I don't know if that part was like necessary, because it's like the whole thing of astrotheology is that like it's belief based at a certain point. Just say, and they believed this. I don't know. So anyway, so oh, I need one of these. Sorry. Okay, so we had that there was the one field, the flood boat. E and Ku gave us some other meanings. And then we get but where, I'm trying to look where this one fits. Oh, okay, I see. So I think I said when I was earlier that one of the meanings, I think it was of ma, could be a box. But through that, then you get to what is an other logogram that better actually says box. Like and it's this one, sheed. So now sheed is kind of like being played here, right? So sheed is on the board, as it were. And that can mean box or chest, but one reading of it is oven. So that was the whole thing. The box/chest, if you use this logogram, it can be read that it was an oven. So it's like, was there just like a weird translation thing where the waters came from an oven? But this reminds me of, and this is why I brought up that when I said earlier today, I had been watching a video with John Lundwall, is Lundwall, I think, if you want to check. That there's this idea of the foundation stone. I'm not sure if I don't think this chapter actually goes into that part, but I think there's separate legends that are not necessarily from this flood story, where the reason that a flood can emerge is because the waters come from below, that a foundation stone is removed. Like, imagine that there's some kind of stone that is like the plug in the drain or something like that. And if that one stone is moved, all the waters just, like spread out. And I think that was like a story about King David or something. But I'm wondering if it's something like that. It's not, it could just be one of those things. It's not like the water, well, yes, there are actually separate stories about water coming from stone, but I'm just saying, what if it's all some square thing is, just makes water appear? Like what is this, the myth actually talking about? There's probably like a missing thing that ancient people were like, oh yeah, we totally know what that, and then like we're like, why is water just coming out of things? So then there's some other stuff about the specific type of wood. Oh, mole. We're using mole again. I know that's in here somewhere. Oh, here. So, I believe mole just means like a star or constellation. So we'll put that over here. And I think if we use that with, Gan or Ga, because I'm looking at a picture in the book and it looks like this one, which is Gan or Iku, but in the book it says Ga, which is a very similar looking that I also have in the other pile. Yeah, there was these other ones that look very similar. Like this one, but it's like 3 or the 2 wedges. So, I mean, I don't read Sumerian. There's probably something very obvious to Sumerian students, and they think that I'm kind of like an idiot or something. It's like, I don't know Sumerian. I'm just like looking at how, I like, oh, this one looks like flowing because they're all going the same way, or there's probably a way that things get recognized that this looks like one of something and it can mean one, yeah, so it's just, oh, okay, so then they're saying like this same word could be used. Okay, so there's like Noah's Ark, which is a flood boat. And there's also some kind of, there's the Ark of the Covenant, which is not mentioned in this specific chapter, but is another square. So, I mean, is that it? I don't know. And then there's also, they're saying the ark that Moses was in, some like a basket. And I believe in Greek myths, there's a couple different cases where someone, usually a woman who's about to have like some pregnant woman that's going to have a demigod or god offspring, is put in some kind of large box or chest and thrown into the sea, and then they land somewhere, and then the son grows up, and I don't remember which one that is, but that's also a thing, right? That's also, so this same structure could be in different myths, is what we're saying, like the same idea of there being like the ark, the box, the chest, the boat, the vessel that you put into the water somewhere, and it lands somewhere else. There's a whole thing here about how we get the gopher wood. And it makes sense. It has to do with like how when you transliterate from one language to another, that like a B and a P might be similar, or like a V and a W. Like there's certain like standard shifts that we know happen. So it has to do with that, and it gets to like this type of like wood, but I don't really know if that's relevant. Like, I guess what McHugh is trying to say is that using the wordplay, he can even explain why this wood is mentioned. And yeah, it's like, why is that wood even mentioned? It must have something to do with something, but is it important to the flood story overall? It's like, maybe that was like something to do with an ancient rite that we have no idea about. I mean, I don't know why that is important. Oh, so then they talk about that in the Noah story, the ark landed on the mountains. So, do I have the one for that? Oh, so we used this one for chapter 7, and because this lagab looks like the square, it gets played on the board. And yeah, Mool's already here. So we're saying that lagab can be read as Kur, which would mean mountains. I think that's right. Well, yeah, what's one of the meanings? And we have the box, the chest. The flood. Oh, yeah, the flood. Okay, so this gur can be read uru, and uru can mean flood, like this means flood, but another reading of uru is tilla, which means Ararat. So McHugh is saying that because Gur Uru is involved, then that's telling us that it landed in the mountains of Ararat. But is this gonna be, because I know they showed an image of this earlier. I don't know if it comes up again. Okay, so this is where, okay, I'm gonna just kind of move these for a moment. So if Argo is here and the Pegasus, I think this is in frame. Let me just check some. Yeah, so the Pegasus square would be like off the edge. It's not, oh, sorry, it's not even, it wouldn't even be on this page. It would be like off the edge. But in this area is the Milky Way. And then this is the ecliptic, where the sun and moon and planets would be traveling. And Gemini is here, so I'm going to draw that in. So Gemini can be to people. And what color is it? Brown, I guess. But so the main stars is Pollux and Castor. And there's like some stars, I think, like in there. But, and the torsos would be here, and their arms, but it can be imagined as like a mountain with two peaks. So Gemini can be a mountain. Or Twin Peaks. It's not a mountain. It's still twins. It's just Twin Peaks instead of two brothers. Or, yeah, in this case, it would just be two brothers. Okay, I'm just flipping back to where I was. Did that part. Oh, okay, so then we talk about the release of the birds. So that's part that's in the story. And in chapter 8, and I think I mentioned this for chapter 7, McHugh goes back to where next to this, in this story, this would be some kind of arc. Do I have a pencil? This would also be like box. In this area here was a constellation of the Swallow. So McHugh is saying, if this is the vessel that is going to land on the mountain, that the birds being released would be here. Like, I've drawn it the standard like Pisces line art, but these are also, and I think we talked about this, these are the tails. So they're the tails of a swallow. So there was a bird imagined here. But if we go here to this version with Argo, I'm sorry, I'm just getting another marker. Let's see. There's black. It's this sort of light pinkish color. Okay, so the raven is over here. And okay, yeah, I should just mention briefly, just to clarify, this drawing, just like the other one, is not like all the way to scale. It's a little more along the ecliptic. It makes a little more sense, but because I'm trying to like do 3D spherical thing on like 2D flat paper, the constellations down here are pretty distorted. So Columba the dove is really close to the star Canopus, but it looks like I have it over here, but because this is actually, Argo's actually tilted. I drew it straight, but it's really tilted. So this star is like over here more, and Columba is like in close to it. But yeah, there's a bird here. And this pink marker doesn't seem like it works through. So it's kind of like, well, which thing is the ark? This is a raven and a dove are in the stars. But yes, there is also a swallow here, and there are other birds. Right here, like Cygnus, the swan, also quite close to this arc box. Also the eagle. I mean, an eagle specifically isn't in the myth, but it is another bird figure. So let's see if we need to put some of these back. This was over here somewhere. No, let's put that here for right now, because I think there's another one that comes in. I have this one. Oh, yeah. So this, oh, okay, I see. This is the name for the swallow. Nam is just the name for the swallow. So, yeah. I'm looking if there's something else. Oh, I was talking about the idea of plucking the olive branch. Because in the Noah story, the dove returns with an olive branch. Oh, okay. So this, remember we had the field was Iku, and then we had Iku. So ku, and it looks like there's an Akkadian word. One other meaning of ku could be a kind of a twig. So, oh, and then lagab could mean olive in some sense. So, and I think I did say this in the other parts. It's kind of like you would have to kind of read the book and decide, because like if I'm not a linguist, so if it just has these like this equals this, and I just have to be like, yeah, that equals that, because I have no idea. But it seems like, I don't know how Sumerian works, but it seems like each of these logograms, and let's say there was like, I think I heard this number somewhere, but don't quote me because, again, not the expert. I think that there was like 600 different logograms or some number, but that was for like all these words they had to use. So I imagine that there was some kind of context involved, like how you link the logograms together. I mean, because I understand how like, the English alphabet that I use works is like, well, yeah, there's only 26 characters, but it's phonetic. So you can make many, many combinations. And I think Sumerian is syllabic. So maybe there was like how many different syllables. So it's still, you can still build words and they have different meanings, but it's just like, it seems like there's a lot of different readings and wordplay involved that it's just hard to, really? It can mean all those things? How did anyone ever read? Okay, so, Noah's in the ark. It got on the mountains. He sends the raven and then the dove. The dove brings back the olive twig. So then it says Noah built an altar. Right, that's in the story. That after leaving the ark, Noah builds an altar. This dingir is used because this just means like deity or God. I think this just means deity or God. It's that symbol. Oh, because the Ikuga logogram could also be altar. It might just be like a whole bunch of things that are square. This field can represent. Ashiku. I think they're saying Dingir has it like a variant that it's God, but it also would designate making the burnt offering. And then God would be the altar. Oh, so then we talk about the bow. Okay, so I guess usually it's interpreted as being the rainbow, right? Like after it rains and the sun is out, we see a rainbow, but there's also a bow constellation. But I'll just use orange. Nah. Isn't Sirius a blue star? Let's just use blue. So, I believe this star here is Sirius. Why so Sirius? Sorry. Sirius itself is the arrowhead. I think the bow is like these stars down here. Then this becomes the arrow. Also, my drawing might not be exactly how it is in, the real sky, but there's like a bow, and then there's like a line that represents the arrow, and then the star Sirius is the arrowhead. So next to this boat, there's a bow. There's also the two birds that are involved. There's also a mountain. But is it all taking place here? Oh, okay, so then going back to here, where we had Nam for the swallow, Igu. Oh, okay, so I guess it goes to Akkadian words. So the Akkadian word associated with the swallow is maratu, but that can mean rainbow. But it looks like it also can mean some kind of clasp or connection, the knot of Pisces, which represents, like, the name for this cord would also be an Akkadian word. It looks like riksu, and that means a covenant because it's binding things together. But if this is the swallow, then is it also Pisces with the knot? And that does kind of get to the end of the chapter. So this one is like a little bit weird for me because it's like, well, I can't really show both things. Can I show both things and get it in? It's kind of like, is it this boat with this mountain, or is it like this boat with these birds and this covenant in the sky, or is it this covenant in the sky? And I think it's all related. It might just be answers yes to all of the above. It's all related to a flood myth. But I mean, I'm learning a little bit of Sumerian almost, so that's good. So I'll just say chapter 9. I'm not going to talk about that one right now. I think I said there's up to chapter 15.